Luis Enrique's tactics have made PSG the most frightening team in Europe, but Mikel Arteta, well, he's no fool, is he? Making this game their chaotic home, eliminating PSG's rotations and utilising set pieces again could be the way for Arsenal to finally lift a European trophy. I'm Jacob Horsfall, FourFourTwo's resident tactician, and this is why Arsenal can win the Champions League final. To understand how Arsenal can beat the current holders, we've first got to look at some of PSG's other Champions League performances, because there's some nice little clues for us in there. No Champions League team has won possession in the midfield more than PSG this season, with a whopping 80 turnovers separating them from the second best. But what does that really tell us about PSG? Well, they're superb pressers. They commit extremely high to look to minimise your angles and then force the ball out wide before cutting off any central passes. Romero in this case has two options. A small set for Bentancur, who can then switch the ball to the far side, or he plays a square pass to 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏. However, both those options are still huge risks because they'd have to be weighted perfectly to avoid two bloodthirsty wingers, which opens up a big can of worms for Mikel Arteta. Arsenal rank 8th in the Premier League for ball retention. They've been dispossessed as many times as 14th place Leeds United. When you consider the fact that Arsenal have very rarely played a team who actually want to play proper football against the Gunners and will actually go really aggressive in the press, you imagine that Arteta's going to want to change things and will make some tweaks to get around PSG's press. This season, Arsenal have regularly split their centre-halves in build-up to utilise David Raya's comfortability playing out from the back, which you do come to expect from pretty much every top team to win the Premier League. But Mikel Arteta has also brought a sense of pragmatism in possession that we are starting to see the majority of Europe's elite sides adopt. Fulham have 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗧's forward passing angles almost completely cut off here. Most top sides would encourage this player to play backwards and retain possession before then going forwards. But not Arsenal. Instead, Eze clips one down the line to Victor Gyökeres, who is darting in behind and stretching the opposition's defence, which they've been able to do consistently this season, with the Swede leading the line. They've played a long ball 44.8 times per league game this season, but they can because they are relentless when it comes to winning those second balls. If the opposition press Arsenal and force their hands, they have Gyökeres to hit, but more importantly, they have Declan Rice, 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, and others like Zubimendi to latch onto those loose balls because they're all great mobile operators. Which, ladies and gentlemen, is the key for Mikel Arteta in this Champions League final. 𝗕𝗫𝗏𝗏𝗏 posted this graphic on Twitter. This shows that when PSG engage in more duels, their non-penalty XG is lower. In turn, they're likely to win less. Arsenal, on the other hand, well, they handle it just fine, which everyone has come accustomed to in England. If you go up against Arsenal, you try and make it a little bit chaotic to find that little bit of an edge. Well, let's be honest, you're not going to be walking away happy and smiling. Therefore, I think we'll see something almost reminiscent of Unai Emery's Aston Villa build-up. A narrow central shape with just two players in the wide areas. Arsenal will probably attempt to group PSG into small areas and pull them into a heavy press, before then playing direct to a midfield stationed relatively high. Now, obviously, the game's not going to be played on a stat sheet, it's not going to be played on a virtual tactics board, but if they channel their inner dark side that we've seen throughout this season, then Arsenal have a real chance of breaking through PSG consistently. In the Club World Cup final, Chelsea used this strategy to do exactly that. You see them almost vacating the first phase, giving themselves a 2-2 or potentially a 2-3 if you count Caicedo, which commits 5 PSG players high up the pitch. So when Sanchez sent that ball long from his own box, Chelsea had a 4v4 against PSG's back line, with 2 Chelsea players in individual battles racing towards PSG's defence. If Arsenal can create similar scenarios, especially when you consider the fact that their squad is so much better than Chelsea's, then they'll give themselves even more than a fighting chance of winning the Champions League. But speaking of fighting, what can they do when PSG have the ball? Because that's when they really offer their threats. Before we get to that though, here's a quick nudge in the direction of our FourFourTwo magazine, in which there is a brilliant offer for you right now of up to 36% off on various subscription packages. All you have to do is click the link in the description and choose whichever one suits you best. But for now, Let's get back to Mikel Arteta's Arsenal genius. Arsenal have the second least opposition passes per defensive action in the Premier League this season, which is great and means that obviously they're going to be aggressive out of possession, they're going to try to turn the ball over, they're going to be consistently in your face. But when it comes to PSG, I don't think that sort of pressing stat is the really most important here, because PSG's rotations are brutal, with Dembele, 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗥𝗧𝗏 and others moving freely. So you don't really want to be committing man-to-man, being super aggressive and just seeing yourselves being dragged all over the shop by PSG's attack. However, an important stat is the fact that these are the zones that Arsenal concede their shots in, with just 54% of their shots that 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏 being inside the 18-yard box. Now that is more important to me, because that's not just them pressing really high, really being committed in a pressing structure. That's a lot about desire, about the willingness to throw your body on the line, get across it, and the incredibly rigid defensive structure that Arteta has built for Arsenal when they're in their own half. Their 4-3-3 shape is established as the foundations of their brilliance, but the back five players are the keys that have unlocked the upper levels of elite defence. Arsenal out of possession do, again, like their in possession stuff, undo a few of the typical tropes of a title winning side. If they are turned round when pressing and the opposition find themselves with the ball driving from a wide position, the fullbacks won't regularly step out of the back line to meet the ball carrier like you typically expect. Instead, they will look to offer protection for their two centre-halves and defend the danger zone of a darting running behind. Doing this allows Saliba and Gabriel to do what they do best. With Garnacho in possession, especially considering the fact it's Alejandro Garnacho, you would expect Jurriën Timber here to go full throttle and try to win the ball. But the butterfly effect would see Saliba shift over here, which would then drag Eze deeper and leave just one Arsenal centre-half to defend against any box delivery. So instead, Timber stands him up and protects the box so that Garnacho has to produce a ball from distance, whilst the Chelsea striker is in a 2v1 because of Arsenal being able to keep players in the structure and therefore in their box. This sort of approach, and don't get it twisted, Arsenal aren't risk averse, they aren't really safe out of possession, but this sort of approach when you're around your own box allows them to stay within their structure and prevent players being dragged into small side overloads. Not to get all anti-football on you, but in the first leg of the semi-final, Bayern Munich didn't do that. This position is terrifying if you're a Bayern Munich fan, a Bayern Munich player, or one of the coaches in the sidelines. And it comes because of the Bayern fullback committing really high, which means Jonathan Tah has to commit to the wide side of the box. In turn, this pulls Upamecano more central, which then obviously pulls the Bayern right back more central. And if Jonathan Tah doesn't win the ball, which realistically he was never going to do, then the ball can be cut back and 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏 has free view of the Bayern goal. Don't get me wrong, that game was an absolute classic. Now, I would love nothing more than the Champions League final being that full throttle, aggressive, end-to-end football. But let's be honest, for Arsenal's chances of winning the trophy, that's just not going to be the case. Instead, it's going to be all about their marginal gains, or as some may say, set piece again. Ole ole. Arsenal have scored 5 goals via set pieces in this Champions League campaign. It's their biggest differential and something that they inevitably fall back on when the going gets tough. For example, when they hosted Chelsea in the Premier League at the Emirates, you saw William Saliba headed home from a corner and Jurriën Timber poked home from a set piece. Now, don't get me wrong, PSG aren't necessarily scared of a set piece either. They've scored 8 set piece goals in their run to the Champions League final. But this just is Arsenal's domain, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Champions League final was decided by Gabriel rising like a salmon above everyone else in the box. It would be hilariously on brand. And you can say what you want about it, but they've just won the most competitive Premier League in my lifetime. So why can't Mikel Arteta and Arsenal beat the reigning champions? I don't have a reason. But I've been Jacob Horsfall, this has been 442, and we'll see you all next week for some more brilliant tactical analysis. Peace.